Madam Mayor, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council, good afternoon. I'm Keith Chadwell, Deputy City Manager. I'm pleased to provide you with a current status involving the administration's response to the discovery of pockets of lead contamination in 5 of Durham's parks. Hopefully this has been followed, I assume this has been followed very, very closely, and want to start at with the point that at this point in time, all field work, all laboratory assessments have been completed. The laboratory results have been submitted to the Mid-Atlantic and Associates, the consultant that did all of the field assessments for us, and they have written a report of those findings. Those findings have been submitted to the State Department of Environmental Quality. That's a step that's very, very important to us in terms of vetting the results and informing at an important time when we start deliberations around the remediations and final resolutions on this infestation of what our options are going to be. So briefly, one reminder that by the measurement of leads in bare soils and play areas, a threshold of concern would be pockets of concentration of lead that measure in the rate of 400 parts per million. So by park, the results are as follows in the parks that were studied. In Walltown Park, the results show that this threshold was met or exceeded in 8 samples throughout the 8 acres of the park. In East Durham Park, the assessments revealed that 8 samples met or exceeded this threshold throughout the 4 acres of the park. At Northgate Park, in the park itself, not including the playground, which I'll come back to in a moment, there were no samples that met or exceeded that threshold of concern. In Lyon Park, and that's a 27-acre facility, in Lyon Park, there was 1 sample that met or exceeded that threshold of concern. And in East End Park, in the areas that are accessible to the public, there was 1 sample that met or exceeded the threshold of concern. 2 additional areas were discovered inside a fenced area that was the location of the former sign and signal shop, which is no longer in use and is barricaded to public access. So I want to move from that point to have just a bit of a sharing around how playgrounds got assessed in this space. In the 5 parks, there's a grand total of 9 playgrounds. In 7 of those playgrounds, the construction of the creation of the playground was done with a fabric liner at the base of the playground and the playground equipment. And that fabric lining was also covered with 1 to 1.5 foot levels of mulch. And that's a standard that deals with, once playing on the ground and when folks fall and all those kinds of things, that's not an uncomfortable situation for them. And it's an additional layer of protection as well. In 2 of the parks, the fabric lining was not included in the development, and we're still researching if that's a deviation of a standard or just why that anomaly exists. But as our field assessors saw that there was no lining at that point, they decided to do soil sampling in those particular parks. One of these parks was in Northgate, the other was in East Durham. And indeed, they removed the layer of mulch in the park at Northgate Park, and there was 1 sample that was discovered to be at or exceeding the threshold of concern. And that playground, upon that discovery, was instantly closed. The other park was without the lining is at East Durham Park. The soil samples revealed no results that there was soil contamination at or above the threshold. And so there was no need to close it at that point. I want to share that for the remainder of each of the areas in these parks, where there were no defined areas above this threshold, we've chosen to keep the parks open at this particular point in time. So what happens next now is that now that the DEQ has the results, we have to wait for their final review and analysis. The challenge we're going to have is giving you some definitive timetables on how long this will take. There will not be much of an action that we can take at this point of time. However, I want to hastily say as I make that statement that should not translate into escalating moments of concern, as we're not dealing with a dynamic aspect of a problem that we're dealing with. The problem is the problem. The problem is becoming more and more defined. And the DEQ, along with our consultants, have endorsed the actions that we've taken to block access to those areas. And so in trying to determine timetables, we don't have time to waste, but at this point, we want to take time to be effective. And so I want to, having said all of that, I want to be so bold as to suggest that we're hoping that we'll hear from DEQ in a matter of days and not a matter of weeks. Our results have been submitted to a staff and an organization that deals with maladies of this sort from on a statewide basis. And they understand the gravity of what we've submitted, and we're looking forward to as expedited a return on that as we can. Our intent, once we have those vetted results from DEQ, is to have further deliberations with all of the appropriate state regulatory officials and the consultant, so we begin to frame the framework of what are the options for ultimate remediation on these kinds of things, with the dimension of steps we might take policy-wise and other, so that we don't have a recurrence of this kind of activity based on the results. And also, I think after we've had an opportunity as a staff to consult with the vetted results coming from the regulatory entities, we certainly will have a very, very formal news event to make a sharing of much more detail than I'm providing today, involving those officials, so there'll be clear explanations of what we did, what they found, and we'll set the table for deliberations to come about options that are available to us based on the final results. I want to remind that the analysis that we're receiving from DEQ and not only involves an assessment of any pockets of lead contamination, but the possibility of any existing contaminants that may not be lead, which is an important variable as we consider our options of remediation. So once we have a news event to roll that out, we're going to use our NIS community engagement staff to instantly schedule some meetings in the neighborhoods near the parks, so that we can have very detailed discussions with them about our options for remediation while we're taking the time to deliberate on those options and make recommendations to our city manager about what options we need to take in each of those areas. And so that's about all we have at this time in terms of what's definitive. Obviously, as we are kept up to date with Mid-Atlantic and the results of the work that we're doing with the Department of Environmental Quality, will keep you as posted as we can. But at this time, we ask your forbearance as we deal with a little bit of a challenge to try and be definitive about the timelines.
Thank you, Deputy Manager Chadwell. I will open it up for my colleagues to see if you all have any questions, starting to my left. Councilwoman Johnson.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Just wanted to appreciate the update. Thank you for keeping us in the loop. I know there's been a lot of concern in the community, and I'm glad that y'all are on top of it and being really transparent about what we're finding and making sure folks know. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Johnson. Looking to my right now. Any comments?
I would also concur and appreciate the update, and just note that I shared with the city manager previously, and I just want to share with everyone publicly that I know that the DEQ will come back with great recommendations. I'm going to press us to not use the minimum as a standard and try to make sure that we're focused on what will mitigate not just the lead, but the concern that folks are raising around the fact that it had to be found by community members. And so I do want to press that. as part of this conversation, that we don't miss, the multiple layers of mitigation that need to occur. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Councilwoman Freeman. Any other comments? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to associate myself with Councilmember Freeman's comments. I don't care if we have to shut every park in this city down. If that's what the recommendation is to keep folks safe, then we'll do that. But my question, so whatever it is, for maximum protection. So I just want to be clear. The memo, the email that we got August 3rd, when it was the Midway report, it was, I guess, the Midway report from Mid-Atlantic. It said that no preliminary soil samples taken from playgrounds identified any potential contaminant concerns at that time. So did I hear right that's changed as far as Northgate is concerned, the playground area in Northgate Park? Is that, or is that still true that no playgrounds had any potential contaminant? Maybe other areas in the park, but was there any change from the playground, the statement about playgrounds from the mid-process report we received that the council was notified on August 3rd and what we posted yesterday?
Thank you for the question. When that update was prepared, we did have some challenges around nomenclature between assessment and sampling and a variety of things like that. So let me make a declarative statement that when it came to the playgrounds, if they had that fabric underlining, it was deemed that there was no additional action that was needed based on the protection that the underlining with the mulch topping provided. The mulch, the two playgrounds that did not have the lining, the only barrier of protection was the mulch, the layers of mulch, and it was easy for the consultants to remove that mulch in order to gain access to bare soil. In the absence of the fabric, we had access to bare soil. An initial assessment normally would start with an X-ray determination to get a reading of the parts per million ratings. Mm-hmm. We skipped that because it was a playground, and we went straight to taking samples within those playgrounds to see if there were any areas of concern. Frankly speaking, for the consultants, we were surprised at the one at Northgate, and we had absolutely no results at East Durham. So I hope that clears it up.
Just as a layperson, so the playgrounds that had, it sounds like, is the suggestion that the mulch and the lining acted as some kind of barrier or prophylaxis against exposure, or that's one, and two, are we saying that the playgrounds that had that barrier and lining, we did not pull that up and take soil samples under that? Or because that barrier and lining was there, that precluded soil in those from those playgrounds being tested?
Yes, certainly more the former than the latter. In the science associated with this, and upon the recommendations of Mid-Atlantic, the work plan they submitted in that regard, which was vetted and approved by DEQ, I think the materials associated with that fabric thought that that constituted enough protection that the assessment was not necessary, and that the way it was constructed, soil contamination would not be a risk at that point.
So as a layperson, for me, what that's saying is that it might be there, but because of those barriers, it would not pose any danger to our children. Is that fair?
I'll call that a safe statement at this time.
So the soil samples so the report we got yesterday, the posting that we got yesterday, was that still the case with these parks, that it was of soil that was accessible because there were no, like for example, Northgate, we know about Northgate because the lining wasn't there, it was just mulch and not the lining. Is that correct?
Again, the standard for the pursuit of an assessment on the playground was the absence of the liner.
Okay. Because
of the absence of the liner, the mulch was on top of bare dirt. When the assessors saw bare dirt, they thought it prudent to go ahead and do sampling, notwithstanding what a X-ray assessment might prevail, because it was a playground.
So can we be, is that a standard industry? And I know if this is out of your wheelhouse, forgive me, I know you can get to the right people that can answer this. So should we take assurances that that liner and that mulch combined is adequate enough? I mean, is that the industry standard, that as long as this liner and mulch is there, even if this stuff is in the dirt, that our children are safe? As long as you have that there, is that the industry standard?
Based on a combination of the guidance, the regulatory oversight, and the DEQ approval of the work plan, we feel comfortable with what was done.
Okay. All right, thank you, Madam Mayor. That's it for now.
Thank you for your update this afternoon, and we look forward to the testing results.